To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Sun Tzu. There's no telling how many wars and battles have been won throughout history by diligently applying the principles of Sun Tzu. It must certainly contain profound wisdom if generals have sung its praises for centuries, and I believe we can still learn from it today. So first, I'll be going over my dilemma, then I'll read a small passage and discuss how I've applied the principles I learned into my game and how it specifically led me to improve the battle mechanics. Let's begin. In a previous video, I had mentioned incorporating a set of cards into my game as a combat mechanism. Allow me to explain how they would work. The defensive and offensive player would each have the same 7 cards and would play them in a similar fashion to rock, paper, scissors. These cards would be load. Playing this would enable you to play your next card, which is volley fire. If played at the right time, this card would give you an immediate victory, but it could be countered. Charge. Similar to load, this would enable you to use your next card, which is bayonet attack. Playing this card at the right time would also ensure an immediate victory, unless countered. It would also defeat a volley attack. Fortify. This would repel and defend against a bayonet attack. Formation. This would repel and defend against a volley attack. And finally, retreat. This would allow you to successfully move your unit into another tile, also deflecting volley and bayonet attacks. But it could be defeated by a charge card. The rounds are pretty quick, and to give you a taste, they would go something like this. Both players would likely play one of 2 cards first, load or charge, since these enable the attacks. If my opponent plays load first, I know they are now able to use their volley attack. I also played my load card and could play my volley attack next, but to be safe, I'll play formation. As you can see, they did play their volley attack, so this was a good call. Now I know that their best option is to either retreat or play their charge card. I still haven't used my volley, so if they charge, I could defeat them, but if they retreat, it would deflect my volley. The safest bet for them would be retreat, so I'll play my charge. Okay, so we both played our charge card, which means we can both now use our bayonets. I can play either of my attacks, bayonet or volley. My opponent still has their bayonet card, which defeats volley, so they'll risk it and play bayonet. I'm anticipating this, so I'll play my fortify and counter. At this point, they really only have one option, retreat, and I would have no cards to counter, so they would successfully get away, making this a draw. Now I know this might seem confusing, I hope I explained it well, but I think it's actually pretty easy to learn in a fun little game, almost like a glorified rock, paper, scissors with a hint of bluffing. It might seem simple, but I think it really makes you think on what card your opponent would play next. If you're interested in playing it, I'll have a link to a PDF file, so feel free to download and print it out. Unfortunately, after playtesting this concept, I've decided it just doesn't fit my game. It was pretty exhausting having to go through this process for every single battle, and didn't seem to fit in or connect with the other pieces of my game. It really seemed to become the centerpiece of the game, and all the other pieces felt irrelevant. This led me to a creative drought, and I was pretty stuck on what direction I needed to go in order to add that satisfying spark to my game's combat. This is when I realized I needed new ideas. I was in desperate need of inspiration. Chapter 10, Terrain. Sun Tzu said, "We may distinguish 6 types of terrain to wit. 1. Accessible ground. 2. Entangling ground. 3. Temporizing ground. 4. Narrow passes. 5. Precipitous heights. 6. Positions at a great distance from the enemy. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. With regard to ground of this nature, be before the enemy in occupying the raised and sunny spots, and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you will be able to fight with advantage. Ground which can be abandoned but is hard to reoccupy is called entangling. From a position of this sort, if the enemy is unprepared, you may sally forth and defeat him. But if the enemy is prepared for your coming, and you fail to defeat him, then, return being impossible, disaster will ensue. When the position is such that neither side will gain by making the first move, it is called temporizing ground. In a position of this sort, even though the enemy should offer us an attractive bait, it should be advisable not to stir forth, but rather to retreat, thus enticing the enemy in his turn. Then, when part of his army has come out, we may deliver our attack with advantage. With regard to narrow passes, if you can occupy them first, let them be strongly garrisoned and await the advent of the enemy. Should the army forestall you in occupying a pass, do not go after him if the pass is fully garrisoned, but only if it is weakly garrisoned. With regard to precipitous heights, If you are beforehand with your adversary, you should occupy the raised and sunny spots, and there wait for him to come up. If the enemy has occupied them before you, do not follow him, but retreat and try to entice him away. If you are situated at a great distance from the enemy, and the strength of the two armies is equal, it is not easy to provoke a battle, and fighting will be to your disadvantage. These are the 6 principles connected with Earth. The general who has attained a responsible post must be careful to study them. So when I first read this a few weeks ago, the first thing that stood out to me was the fact that there are 6 terrain types distinguished by Sun Tzu. And if you know anything about my game, there are also 6 terrain types that relate to the sum of my board: wheat, woods, stone, mountain, hills, and water. So my first thought was, how can I correlate my terrain to the distinguished terrain spoken of by Sun Tzu in order to create advantages or disadvantages into the positioning of units on my board? Terrain has always been such a major factor in battles throughout history, often deciding victory or defeat. So to ignore this, I feel would be such a loss, especially when terrain is such a large component of my game. As of now, there's no difference or incentive to positioning your units on certain tiles over others. One thing that particularly bothers me is the fact that there seems to be no advantage to building colonies adjacent to a mountain or on higher terrains. In reality, mountains act as a natural barrier of protection, and a city on a hill gives you a great vantage point to oppose your enemy. Another challenge I've faced in my game is the fact that there's no health mechanism for my units. They're either alive or dead. It's very difficult to incorporate a health percentage when only one unit is allowed to occupy a tile. Of course, I've experimented with allowing several into a tile, but this presents challenges of its own. Should the same amount of musketmen be allowed as cannons? How will players know when they've attacked or moved their units? In my opinion, this seemed to clutter the board and cause confusion in the players. I'm actually really happy with the current combat system, as I think it's simplistic. It really feels like a mini chess match inside the game. It resolves combat quickly and efficiently. However, I still felt as if it's missing that strategic spark. So after reading this passage the other day, I think it finally clicked, just like that aha moment I've spoken of in my last video. What I've decided to do is add maneuvers, if you will, to certain resource cards. Since the resource cards are connected to the terrain tiles, this means I can tie the ability to maneuver directly to the location of a unit on the board. Allow me to explain. The game contains 72 resource cards, 12 of each type. In each 12 piles, there will contain 4 resource cards that have an emblem on them, signifying a maneuver. These maneuver cards can then be played when attacking or defending if your unit is occupying the corresponding terrain tile. I'm not completely settled on the types of maneuvers I'll incorporate, but it will be some sort of the following. Wheat. This would allow you to retreat once attacked, moving your unit into another tile. Perhaps this could also be compared to the entangling ground spoken of by Sun Tzu, being easy to abandon or retreat. Forest. This would allow you to ambush your opponent when played, defeating them immediately. Hills. This will allow you to fortify and deflect an enemy attack, creating a stalemate. This could be great for defense of a colony, incentivizing building on a hill. This would also correspond with the precipitous heights concept. Stone. This would perhaps be encirclement and would prevent your opponent from playing any counter maneuver cards, ensuring victory. Mountains. This could be outflank. While land units may not occupy mountain tiles, if adjacent to one, they would be able to outflank an enemy attack. I had the idea of narrow passes in mind when thinking of this, the idea of being in close proximity to a mountain. Water. I think for water, it would contain one of each maneuver. This will allow naval units to utilize the combat mechanisms, as well as any land units that attack from a naval unit, adding an extra element of surprise. Now, obviously not all the maneuvers directly correspond with the 6 terrain types spoken of by Sun Tzu, but you see how they are inspired and pulled me out of a creative rut. I really love how this could incentivize players to position their units into more favorable terrain tiles. I think this will also add an element of bluffing to the game. Since there's a limited amount of maneuver cards, you'll have to read your opponent and determine if they're in possession of one or not, and more importantly, if you think they'll use it. It could be a lot of fun sitting across the table, putting on your best poker face, and then revealing if you have the upper hand or not. I love the idea that it will also cost a resource card. This will make players weigh the cost of spending it or saving it for other purposes they may have. All in all, I think this just gives the right amount of incentives I've been looking for, the right amount of strategic luck, and beautifully ties the resource cards to the board and pieces in a way that doesn't overcomplicate the rules or add any extra pieces. They still need a lot of playtesting and work, but I'll continue to update you all through the creative process. So what are your thoughts? Do you think this would be an exciting combat mechanism that you'd love to play? Please let me know in the comments. I think this was a really fun topic, and there's so much more that can be said about the art of war, especially when it comes directly to strategic gameplay. That could really make an interesting topic. Perhaps I'll make a video on that next. Thank you all so much for your support these past few weeks. I look forward to continuing this journey with you all. Until next time, farewell.